ethics, and community engagement in HIV research across the United States and sub-Saharan Africa. She has over 20 years of experience in infectious diseases research, including HIV prevention, treatment, and cure-related studies, and more recently, hepatitis B, which is how we have been working together. Her work, Dr. Dubé's work, centers the human and ethical dimensions of scientific innovations. And today, she is going to be discussing her research on HIV cure-related studies and how she is applying these socio-behavioral and ethical frameworks to emerging hepatitis B cure-related research. You're in for a real treat. And without any further ado, Karine.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Debika. And thank you all so much for being here today and braving the rain to come hear this talk. So I am a social behavioral scientist. I am not a basic or biomedical researcher. I'm just going to make that clear, although I do try to integrate with the biomedical sciences. Let's see, next slide. Here are my disclosures: active with Gilead and Merck, and active with AbbVie and ViiV Healthcare. So my proposed outline for today, I'll talk about the landscape of HIV cure-related research and the role of behavioral and social science research. I'll discuss our readiness and resilience framework in the US and how we've adapted it to South Africa. I'll talk about ongoing work in the ACTG, the Advancing Clinical Therapeutics Globally Network, and emerging work in cell and gene therapy. I'll talk about ethics, including patient and participant protections. I'll talk about community engaged research, including our last gift program at UCSD, and then expanding the scope to hepatitis B cure research and some key takeaways. So please raise your hand if you work in cure-related research on HIV. I know some of you do, so Dr. Zach and a few others, excellent. So in HIV cure research, there are one or two goals: either complete elimination of HIV from the body or sustained ART-free suppression or control. There are multiple strategies being investigated, including latency reversal agents to reawaken HIV, or block and lock, which would be a permanent silencing of the virus, immune-based approaches, which would boost the immune system, cell and gene therapy, which would make cells resistant to HIV, and HIV is a very complex virus, so most likely we'll need a combination of approaches. But something distinct is some of the trials require the interruption of therapy, which brings risk to the participants, but also their partners. And so we have a lot of ethical and social behavioral issues to consider. So globally, HIV cure research is about $300 million invested per year in this research. So about 10 years ago, we've worked with a multidisciplinary team to envision a multidisciplinary HIV cure research agenda that would integrate social behavioral sciences with ethics, patient community stakeholder engagement, and translation and implementation science. So this is our unifying framework. And today I'll really focus more on the role of social and behavioral science in early basic cure research. This is another framework that we've adapted from HIV prevention and treatment to cure research. It's the Paul Geist and Michael Surratt functional framework for behavioral and social science research, where we explore 4 different domains. In the basic sciences, we explore fundamental social and psychological processes. With elemental BSSR, we wish to inform interventions within HIV cure science. So for example, everything that has to do with partner protections, prevention of HIV, or strengthening informed consent. With supportive BSSR, we strengthen the design and conduct of HIV cure research in all phases. This is where most of the work has been done. And then integrative, we start to move towards real-world implementation of HIV cure-related strategy. That's where we got into cost effectiveness and implementation science research. So as I've mentioned, most of the work has been in supportive BSSR, where we aim to strengthen the design and outcomes of biomedically focused clinical trials. So for example, here we can determine target product profiles for globally scalable strategies. We can look at acceptability. We can see how people evaluate these different interventions. We can also look at the role of providers, and they've been largely missing from this conversation. So we need to do better in engaging our providers. We aim to improve informed consent. We integrate patient-reported outcomes. We also look at adherence strategies, adherence to the treatment interruptions, but also adherence to treatment, post-treatment interruption. We also aim to minimize social harm and so on. So different ways BSSR has been applied to HIV cure research. Can you please raise your hand if you are a social and behavioral scientist? Great, excellent. We have some representation in the room. So this is the typology of approaches of how BSSR has been incorporated in trials. So most of the work we've done has been mostly in the formative phase with preclinical trial implementation. There's also been a lot of the work done embedded as part of clinical trials. We have not done so much work yet with post-clinical trial implementation, maybe in the future. But that's a really helpful framework. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about our PERSIST grant, which stands for Psychosocial and Ethical Aspects of HIV Cure Research in the US. We have 3 aims. The first is to evaluate the quality of consent, the extent of therapeutic misconception and misestimation and decision-making. So how people make decisions, that's the readiness piece. And then the second aim is really focused on the resilience piece, helping people with HIV navigate through these really complex trials and treatment interruptions. And then we have a third aim, which is really more community-based. I'll talk a little bit about that. We're trying to build consensus to help resolve critical challenges in HIV cure research. So the first aim is really meant at readiness and then resilience. And this has really been endorsed by the community of people with HIV. So here are people who've participated in ATI, treatment interruption trials, and have shared their stories and have had different outcomes. So people who are back on ART, people who have been cured of HIV, including Adam Castillero here, the London patient, or Paul Edmonds, the City of Hope patient, the Boston patient B here, Gary Steinhold, who did a stem cell transplant and later had a rebound. Lauren Willenberg, the San Francisco patient, she's an exceptional elite controller. So lots of wonderful stories, people wanting to be public with their story. But across all these amazing stories, what we found was that there are unmet needs and psychosocial needs across the entire trajectory. And they've really advocated for a journey approach to HIV cure research participation. So looking at what people need before their trial and how we can support them to make the decision, what they need during the treatment interruption, particularly around relational dynamics and potential risks to partners and mental health and psychosocial support, and then what they'll need after their trial. And that's what it gets really interesting, because even people who are back on treatment still need support with their readherence to treatment. People who are so-called post-intervention controller also have unique stressors. For example, the uncertainty of not knowing when their virus will come back, whether it will come back. And even people who are cured have also had unmet needs. So, for example, Timothy Ray Brown, who's the Berlin patient, the first person cured of HIV, lost his housing in Palm Springs after he became cured because he no longer qualified for AIDS benefits. And so if we're going to be serious about finding a cure, I think we're going to have to be very proactive about looking at the potential policy implications of cure research. And so we're also starting to think a little bit about that. So really approaching this from a trajectory approach and a journey approach for people. And so we're trying to gather evidence now, like how do people experience these trials, and then eventually using that evidence to design evidence-based interventions to support them along the way. So our readiness piece, we've used different theoretical frameworks, including fuzzy trace theory, and then the brief informed consent evaluation protocol. That is Jeremy Sugarman at Hopkins, who let us adapt his instrument to look at the quality of consent. And we're looking at different domains, including how people recall or appraise the risks or the benefits of cure research, how they perceive different interventions and the burdens associated with their trials, the emotion, and then the partner protections, which we'll talk a little bit about. And so here we found that if we simplify consent, people actually have greater, they retain information better about potential risks and benefits. This was a hypothetical experimental survey. So we have not done that yet as part of an actual ATI trial, but we found that people had much better understanding of the trial if we simplified information using the GIST information. We also found good quality of consent in some of the UCSD, UCSF studies, but there's always the risk that people will overestimate the benefits of cure research and underestimate the risks. And for a minority of people, there's always misconceptions and misestimations. And so we've seen this now across multiple studies. The resilience piece, we've applied various theoretical frameworks, including stress and coping, the stages of change, the theoretical framework of acceptability, relational theory to look at partner protections. And now we're also starting to use the trans theoretical model, where we put different theories together. And then here we look at the experience with interventions and procedures and treatment interruptions, more longitudinal trajectories of people, like their emotions, anxiety, depression, and so on, how they've dealt with partner protections, and then the actual social impacts of going through a cure-related trial and then treatment interruption. So we're finding that there is cumulative evidence now of the psychosocial impacts of being part of a cure-related trial with a treatment interruption. So impacts on quality of life, impacts on stigma, and so on. So stigma is a little tricky, because being part of a cure trial can help them overcome stigma. But then if they have to become viremic during a treatment interruptions and they're no longer part of the U equals U community, then it can lead to an increase in stigma. So I think we're going to also have to be very proactive to destigmatize becoming viremic as part of a cure-related trial with a treatment interruption. Here we applied the theory of stress and coping to the ATI journey. We had a health psychologist at UCSF named Miranda Hill who helped us with this, and we found many different types of stress and many different approaches to coping, including meaning-based coping and the source of support. The staff actually was a really important stress buffering mechanism as part of a cure trial. They have a really important role to play in helping participant get through this really intense journey. So I want to talk about one cure trial in particular. This was done in UCSF during the COVID pandemic. So this has 5 interventions. So as we go through these trials, we can also think about how can this be an improvement above standard care, so 1 pill a day or long acting. So as we move forward, I think we all understand now that we'll need to keep these interventions pretty simple. But this was done, and the hope was if we were going to do all of this, it could lead to potential post-intervention control. So there was a weeks 0, 4, and 12, there was a DNA vaccine administered through electroporation, which is almost like a bit of an electric shock. Then week 20 was an MVA boost. Then weekly BNAB combination, by neutralizing antibody and a TLR9 agonist. And then at week 34 was the start of the treatment interruption to look at the effect on the immune system. And the goal is that with this treatment interruption, if virus comes back, then the immune system would take over. But we know that it's not as simple. So this was the outcome of this trial. There was 3 people who had expected viral rebound, 2 had non-exponential growth, and then 4 had durable partial control. That's pretty good in terms of post-intervention control. But these are good odds for us here in cure-related research. But then everyone resumed ART for non-protocol reasons, mainly due to the COVID pandemic. But there was one person who never had a rebound, as you can see here. And you would think that's a really wonderful outcome, but even this person had unique stressors given the uncertainty. And we'll come back to this participant. So for years now, like almost a decade, we've advocated, people like me, so other social scientists, that we need to understand what's happening to participants during these really intensive trials. So monitoring of participants' psychosocial experience is really crucial. We were able to get one sentence inserted in this recommendation statement. This was a consensus meeting in 2018-2019 done at the Reagan Institute. The first time people got together in a room to decide how we were going to do treatment interruptions safely and ethically. But this was mostly focused on the global north. But we'll come back to that. So thanks to this report, now we know we need to monitor people. And so this is what we did throughout this 5-intervention trial. We sort of surveyed and interviewed people after different interventions. And then post-treatment interruption, we did a pretty in-depth interview. And we also interviewed them again at the end of the study. This was done at UCSF. So what we learned from the readiness framework, people actually had a really good understanding of the clinical trial. They scored really well for some of these questions, but there were always that 1 or 2 people who have some misestimation, for example, thinking that the trial would benefit their personal health or that the trial would remove all HIV from the body. So still, even with people who are really close to these research networks, we still need to emphasize that, you know, these trials will likely not cure them. The goal is to keep HIV suppressed in the absence of therapy. There's still latent HIV inside the cells, but we still need to repeat that as part of even an intensive study like this one. So what we found is that all participants understood the goal of the study. They had really strong trust in the research team. They also developed a keen scientific curiosity in observing their viral loads during the ATI. They became very invested in the outcome. But several of them, actually all of them, had above mild anxiety at some point in the trial. Main worries related to the risk of forward HIV transmission, the anxiety of being off ART, the viremia-related worry. So that's a patient participant reported outcome that we're trying to create in the context of cure research. It's borrowed from fear of recurrence in oncology, and then also the possibility of acute retroviral syndrome. And actually, one participant found sort of an inconsistency in the protocol. They had weekly viral load tests until their viral rebound, and then they had biweekly testing, but people still wanted their weekly viral load measurements because information was knowledge and power for them. And so the post-intervention controller that had no rebound that I mentioned earlier. So this participant was really interesting because he felt like he was in a peerless middle ground between not being cured and living with HIV on ART. So he felt a little bit like he was left in limbo. There was a little bit of uncertainty about what caused his lack of rebound with this 5 intervention. So I think as we move forward, we'll need to really be able to understand the effect of each intervention on this post-intervention control. We also learned that there were some readherence challenges with ART following the treatment interruption. So people will need readherence support for their treatment. So lots of really great quotes from our participants here about what was anxiety producing and the fluctuations on the viral load. And then the participant who said, acknowledged that information is my medicine. This person wanted the weekly viral load, even though the protocol said biweekly. And then the confusion with the trial outcome. So lots of really interesting quotes. But where we learned the most from this trial was actually around partner dynamics. So we interviewed 7 people after their treatment interruptions, and 4 out of 7 experienced some difficulties with the extended treatment interruptions related to partner participant protections. So partner protections were more difficult as time progressed in terms of trying to limit the risk of HIV transmission. There was discomfort with intimacy. It was really hard to find out if partners were on PrEP. People were out of practice. One partner took emergency PEP, provoking anxiety and needing additional support. And then partners also had fertility desires. So in one instance, condomless sex coincided with the viremic window, which is that pretty interesting quote to the right. So now we really hope to gather all this evidence and help generate more evidence-based behavioral and social science research in this area. And this is where we can collaborate between cure research and HIV prevention. And I'll come back to that because that's a big piece of advocacy for me. So another thing we learned from both the study in Philadelphia and San Francisco was that at the time of viral rebound was pretty traumatic for people. So when their virus comes back, both of them said, I felt like a failure. I felt like I'd failed my community. So we know that's another really important point of intervention because that's the start of the journey. So we know people have to sometimes rebound so the immune system can take over and then they can achieve post-intervention control. So we know that's a time when we need to provide a lot more support for participants. And these are some examples of the curves that we're generating in terms of our like anxiety ratings and depression ratings and different trajectories. The start shows the start of the analytical treatment interruption. And so this is evidence that we'll likely need to support people through their treatment interruptions. Also knowing that these mental health challenges are more prevalent in the community of people with HIV. So this was done in San Francisco. Most of the participants were older and were male and were white. And obviously, treatment interruptions have to be done acknowledging the social cultural context. So this is a completely different scenario where we've applied social behavioral sciences. But of course, what's true in San Francisco may not be true in a setting like South Africa. So I'll talk about a completely different setting. This was done with the females rising through education, support, and health cohort with young women, age 18 to say 29. So completely different scenario. Then my question to you all, how do we do treatment interruption trials with young women who have been diagnosed during acute HIV, who are treated really early? How do we do those treatment interruption trials safely and ethically? It's a huge question. As you can see, there's a miasma of issues there that intersect with social behavioral and ethics. And that took us a really long time to figure out with lots of community stakeholder patient engagement. Of course, we want women included, and we want to center the trials around their needs. But it took a lot of consultation and a lot of engagement from many different stakeholders. So this work really started 6 years ago, next month, where we worked with the HIV pathogenesis program community advisory board to say, like, how are we going to do this? So we knew we needed to do social behavioral research with not just the participants, but also women in the cohort, community members, partners, and third parties. For the first time, we were able to get partners involved. Although they're not part of the trial, they are implicated by these treatment interruptions. The staff also were implicated, and the women without HIV. So really acknowledging the continuum of prevention, treatment, cure, research. And the reason why this was done in the setting is if people are treated during acute HIV, they have a much smaller reservoir, so that makes them more likely to achieve post-intervention control. So this is in collaboration with the Regon Institute, really leveraging the prevention, treatment, cure research continuum and combining basic science with social good. So every woman in the prevention cohort goes through a socioeconomic empowerment program. They take literacy, computer classes, and so on to prevent HIV from happening in the first place. But one big question that we had to resolve was the issue around disclosure of HIV and treatment interruption. At first, people was like, do we ask women to disclose their status? What do we do? And we met several times with the CAB, and we did focus groups, and they said, actually, this should not be a requirement. We should really let women decide whether or not they will disclose their HIV and their treatment interruption. And some really powerful quotes here. So yes, because I see the danger. When I have an abusive partner who just comes and demands that we have sex and then he acquires HIV, it's true that we change partners. We are failing to disclose, but we can't be forced to disclose. But since now it involves social workers and psychologists, it really helps people to see what happens if I'm hiding my status. So really acknowledging the social context of these of the disclosure, and that took a lot of stakeholder engagement to get it just right. We also adapted a partner participant protection package, really acknowledging that it's really about balancing the risk for the participants and the partners. It really has to be in balance. So another sort of formative work that we did was the women in the cohort, women diagnosed during acute HIV who could not participate in the ATI trial. For some reason, they were not eligible. For example, they had resistance to the body neutralizing antibody, so they could not join the trial itself. But they could still be part of cure-related research with a social behavioral survey and interview. So they gave us some really interesting baseline data in terms of like pretty high depression score. About 40% had major depression. And then anxiety scores were also pretty high. 35% had either moderate or severe anxiety. Self-esteem were rather high because they had been part of that social empowerment program. Also, stigma, not shown here, was also pretty high in that community. So really applying the socio-ecological model to HIV cure research. But from that study, we actually derived a lot of really helpful considerations for the design and the conduct of cure-related research with women diagnosed during acute HIV. They gave us some amazing considerations in terms of consent, in terms of ensuring continuity of care, particularly for women who were diagnosed during acute HIV, and also for their periods of resuppression after the ATI, what it would take. Mental health, psychosocial support. Even though there's a lack of mental health support, we knew that had to be part of the design. Participant autonomy was really important, trust and communication, and then the whole psychosocial support. So lots of issues to consider there. And then we took all of these learnings and applied them for the ATI trial. So this trial started in 2022. And before that, the team faced not only COVID, but they also felt political unrest. They faced climatic events. So, I mean, to get this trial started took a lot of effort from the team. And after 3 years of preparation, they were finally able to get the trial started, which was industry sponsored. So in this trial, they tested a combination of two broad neutralizing antibody, VRC07-523LS and CAP256V2LS, which are more long-acting type antibodies, with a TLR7 agonist, visitalimab, in women with HIV subtype C. So this, to our knowledge, was one of the very first trials with women, entirely with women in sub-Saharan Africa. And it just had the last visit earlier this year. And the results were announced at CROI. So there were three main outcomes. The early rebound or early restart group, 7 out of 20 had early restart, 6 out of 20 had delayed restart, and then 4 out of 20 had late rebound, or they were so-called post-intervention controllers. So in our field, in the odds of 1 out of 5 is actually pretty good that we have achieved this rate of post-intervention control. So the team is still in the process of analyzing and consolidating the biomedical data, but we were able to integrate mental health outcomes, so including decisional confidence, which was pretty high, and self-esteem, which was pretty high. But anxiety and depression fluctuated actually, and was actually highest in the post-intervention control group at the end, even though the numbers are pretty small. We know that there are unique stressors, once again, for these post-intervention controllers. And then resilience was pretty stable as a trait throughout. We also integrated different domains around the stressors and the coping mechanism, adapting the model that you saw earlier to South Africa. So we saw that the stressors here were really the treatment interruptions, the fear of HIV and viral rebound, the ambiguity around when they would restart treatment, disclosure concerns, physical discomfort from trial procedures, and of course, stigma. And then many coping mechanisms relying on the staff, clinical monitoring and the strong relationship with the staff, and then having a really robust psychosocial support program, which was part of the design from the very beginning. We knew we couldn't do this study without it, and I'll talk a little bit about it shortly. Another domain that we emphasized was partner participant protections and sex behavior during the treatment interruption, which we knew was a source of stress. And we just submitted this paper over the weekend. So basically, people have sex during their treatment interruptions. About pretty much everyone was sexually active during the analytical treatment interruptions and had to negotiate safe sex during the treatment interruption, which is a pretty important finding. The long-term delayed group was the one with the most median days since they had last sex. So this is where we'll need a lot more psychosocial and behavioral science and support in the years to come if treatment interruption trials are to be scaled up, particularly in the current climate, where community level viremia is expected to increase. Maybe that's my advocacy hat. But while participants generally had very positive attitudes toward prevention, they still had limited control over HIV prevention during their ATI. And disclosure remained a challenge. And that also revealed some social and relational barriers, particularly fear of conflict. And we also detected some social harm events as part of this trial. We detected 5 in particular, some of which were like dissolution of partnerships and things like that as a result of the ATI. So we know we need to capture this more routinely in these types of trials moving forward. And here we applied the theory of planned behavior, I should have said. So psychosocial support we know is really important. So we work closely with a lady named Madam Tambu, who's amazing, who implemented an African-centered psychosocial support program that uses the philosophy of Ubuntu, which means we are together. And the goal was really to support people through their treatment interruption, navigating through this intensive treatment interruption. And she's written her lessons learned, supporting people through their treatment interruption and applying a person and environment approach and a real-time ethics lens to help mitigate risks in real time. And now all of these findings are helping inform a practical guide for implementing trauma-informed healing-centered research. So we really hope this could be scaled up across multiple sites. This is really for the staff, helping participants navigate through these treatment interruptions because they come from the same communities as the participants come from. So we're also learning about the effect of the treatment interruptions on partners. And this is, to our knowledge, one of the first time. So of course, partners without HIV have needs around PrEP, initiation, HIV testing, PrEP maintenance during the ATI. Some of them even initiated their own version of PrEP on demand during their ATI. But what was surprising here is that even the partners with HIV also had unmet needs around their own undetectability, their own ability to maintain viral suppressions and their viral blips. They were themselves very invested in the treatment interruptions and didn't want to retransmit the virus and interfere with the ATI trial outcomes. So what we're learning here is this is very dynamic. And even though the trial only take the participant and the partners are not part of the trial, we know they're implicated. So moving forward, I think we need to also think about the partners because they go through the trial really together. So all of these findings are now helping inform new consensus recommendations on treatment interruptions. There was a meeting in Nairobi last year in 2024 to look at the recommendations, prior recommendations, and how these really need to be adapted to allow for more person-centered considerations. So the 2024-2025 guidelines will include hopefully more social behavioral research, more psychosocial monitoring, partner protection, participant protections, and then ART adherence and readherence support post-ATI. So this should be coming out hopefully in Lancet HIV later this year. But we didn't really talk so much about implementation of these considerations. So we'll still need a lot of implementation science around how we actually implement these in the different networks. So this is a comparison of the 2019 and 2024 ATI guidelines. As you can see, there's actually some differences. So the inclusion-exclusion criteria are actually a little bit more lenient in the new guidelines. And the monitoring is actually also a little bit more lenient. But we know these have to be in balance. And we'll also need to acknowledge the social context. And hopefully we'll also have more participant-centered considerations. So we'll see when the paper comes out. This is a beautiful review by Jill Lau, who sort of compared the different, the guidelines. We're also implementing this kind of work now in the ACTG trial. There was one trial that is started, I think, last year and just completed enrollment earlier this year. So in that trial, we actually have 3 time points where we're looking at the trajectory of participants in collaboration with the HIV Vaccine Trials Network. So really focusing on similar domains around how people perceive risks and the benefits, their emotion and the trajectories, and then the participant partner protections. But we're really hoping to have more collaborations across the networks. And then this slide shows where we're incorporating social behavioral science. And so there's been some work done with latency reversal agents. These don't require treatment interruptions if it's only the LRA. So there are not as many questions to ask, but where we really need to look more in depth at the immunological approaches that require treatment interruptions. These are also usually a little bit larger in terms of sample size. And then the cell and gene therapy work, there's emerging trials. There's one in City of Hope and one at Penn where we're going to start to do cell and gene therapy for HIV cure, and we're really going to need more social behavioral research integrated. So I'll talk a little bit about these. But before I do that, I did talk about the need to integrate cure research with prevention. So as we move forward, we've really issued a call to action that cure-related research should collaborate more with the prevention field in terms of the social behavioral research work. A lot of work has already been done in prevention, So we're sitting on 4 years of research on how to prevent HIV transmission. So we really need to work together. So we issued a partner protection package, and we need to really have more integration. So we're hoping to see more integrations between the networks as we move forward. This is a really great review by Ralph Lendovitz, who is here at UCLA, who's the head of ID, I think. He wrote a wonderful review on prevention, treatment, and cure of HIV, showing how these domains are interrelated. And as we move forward with HIV cure research, it's even more true now. We need to leverage across that continuum and then back with treatment and with prevention. So there could be a lot of wonderful opportunities for collaboration across this continuum. And so we've issued a call for justice-informed cure trials with treatment interruptions to acknowledge the effect, not just on participants, but also their partners, the affected communities, and global HIV science, particularly right now, as some of the treatment programs are being dismantled. I think we'll need to wear a lot more of an advocacy lens. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the cell and gene therapy work that's emerging. So this is a trial that's currently ongoing at UCSD and City of Hope. It's a collaboration between the two of a chimeric antigen receptor T cell. We've recruited 6 people through this to this CAR T cell trial. 3 have undergone the infusion. And so we're applying a similar readiness and resilience framework. This trial currently does not have a treatment interruption, but the follow-on trial will likely have a treatment interruption. So we're hoping to learn a lot from our social behavioral work and inform the design of future similar trials. And then a similar trial done at UPenn with Jim Riley and Pablo Tebas that will have a dual CAR T cell therapy with the therapeutic vaccine that hopefully will get initiated soon. Another piece of advocacy, I should have mentioned that 30% of what I do is advocacy. It's not social behavioral science. It's actually wear an advocacy hat. Here is a piece we published in Social and Translational Medicine, Nothing About Us Without Us, Advocacy and Engagement in Genetic Medicine. This was done in collaboration with the Global Gene Therapy Initiative, where we're advocating to make gene therapies globally accessible to resource-limited parts of the world. And there are amazing cross-learnings between the field of sickle cell disease and the field of HIV that happen in these meetings. It's every Thursday. And here we use the analogy of the remission bus, leaving no one behind. But here we're really trying to think strategically about how to build in scalability and equity and translation early on in the research pathway and not wait later. Like the philosophy of let's see if it works and then figure out scalability later. I think we're trying to change that and really build this as critical outcomes early on in the design of these interventions. So we're working with Dr. Sisi Kitio in Uganda and trying to develop capacity for cell and gene therapy in Africa. So in the spirit of equity and making things accessible to many people, I did mention that third aim of the Persist grant. So in that aim, we had implemented over the last 2-3 years a Delphi consensus building process to help resolve some critical challenges in HIV cure-related research with treatment interruptions. There's so many challenges that we face, as you could see. So in this study, we actually involved 6 different groups of people, including community members who were oversampled, biomedical researchers, providers, funders, bioethicists, and social behavioral scientists who study medical mistrust and community engagement. And so the 3 challenges that we tried to resolve were how to better engage people who carry the greatest burden of HIV, how to enhance trust and reduce mistrust in healthcare settings, particularly when discussing treatment interruptions, and then how to design protocols that do not limit working adult participation, knowing how intense these trials are. And so this was 54 Delphi panelists across 4 survey rounds, and this is what they came up with. So the top 3 barriers to cure-related research with treatment interruptions are concerns about treatment interruptions and the side effects, the risk of transmission to partners, and the study procedures and the requirements that are pretty burdensome. And then their top 3 solutions were to center clinical trials around participant needs throughout the research process, to offer equitable compensation, and to ease logistical burdens, to reduce the burdens of these trials. For example, by offering telehealth visits or home-based blood collection for viral load, so they won't have to go to the clinic so often. So let's think about how trials and protocols are written, and then are we really engaging people as early as possible? So another piece of advocacy is to engage people as early as possible in the design of these studies. We're pretty involved with the aging community in San Diego. We know that the epidemic is aging. So when we work with our communities, particularly long-term survivors, we know that they're very frustrated with these age cutoffs in cure-related trials. So as soon as people turn 65, they're usually excluded from most cure-related research. And we know that now like 50% of the population of people with HIV will be aged 60 to 65, like this year. So we know we need to think ahead in terms of how we can engage an older demographic. Of course, we also still have to engage younger people in cure research, but our community is really asking to rethink how trials are designed to also include older people with comorbidities and polypharmacy and so on. So that's a piece of advocacy that my postdoc, Ali Ahmed, actually led, really thinking about trial designs from an older demographic of people with HIV. And they were actually quite willing to participate in different trials, and I'll come back to that. And also the policy piece that I mentioned. So if we're going to be serious about finding a cure, we also need to anticipate policy implications of cure research. We know there are several unmet needs right now, particularly right now in 2025 for long-term survivors, including housing insecurity, financial fragility from decades of unemployment or disability, the need to expand wide funded peer programs, and so on. But what's really interesting is the long-term survivor community has also really called out the need to think about policy needs in a post-cure world. What's going to take now? If we have unmet needs now, what is it going to be if we have a cure in terms of protecting hard-won benefits to make sure people don't lose their housing, their disability, or healthcare if they become cured, because then it would be much harder to get people involved in these types of studies. So we just published a paper in a Journal of the International AIDS Society. That's more of a policy piece, and then we hope to also create a policy brief and do a lot more advocacy with the long-term survivor community on this. So I do a lot of work with older people with HIV. One of the projects that we have in San Diego is called The Last Gift. You may have heard of it. It's for people with HIV who are near the end of their life, who have been excluded from trials for like decades and now really want to participate in cure research. So for the last 8 years, we've done a lot of social behavioral research with the cohort. People are literally donating their tissues to help advance the science of where HIV persists in the bodies across different compartments. And with this type of research, for example, we've been able to find that HIV hides in different regions of the brains and so on. And that's a really great model of integration of basic biomedical and social behavioral research and ethics. And actually, some of the participants are actually from LA, and they come down to San Diego for The Last Gift. So with the community, really early on, we created ethical considerations and really centered patient participant needs, developing considerations, particularly for the end of life. And there's what ethics tells us we need to do, but then there's what we actually really need to do to make the study ethical. And then lots of considerations around advanced healthcare, mental health, financial, legal issues. We have an amazing team that handles all the psychosocial needs. This is Mike Danielson. He wants his name public. He wants to be known for being part of The Last Gift. He was a huge advocate for HIV cure research at the end of life. He was actually Julia Roberts' publicist, and he would tell us all these stories about Julia Roberts. He's really amazing. And Denzel Washington. But he's been an amazing advocate for the program throughout, and he wanted to be known for his participation. So as you can imagine, there's different prognosis at the end of life. So there's the issue of prognostic uncertainty that we have to deal with. But something that's really been amazing for us is the community advocated to integrate PROs really early on in the process, patient-reported outcomes. And we were able to find a quality of life at the end of life scaled by Karen Steinhauser at Duke. So this is 7 years of data collection. It doesn't seem like much, but this is done at bedside and hospice setting. And we did this quality of life at the end of life. And we actually found that quality of life at the end of life was preserved in the last gift among the first few participants. So it's giving us hope to continue the program. And then, of course, we found a inverse correlation between quality of life and mental health at the end of life that was pretty statistically significant. We were able to map also the substance use at the end of life for people with HIV now. The most common are alcohol, anti-anxiety medication. There's some opioid use as well in a positive light that has an effect, particularly around pain management. And then something unexpected that happened, we were getting requests for tissues and samples, and it was really hard to prioritize the use of these samples. So the community really stepped up and said, this is how we want to prioritize the use of donations. And so they came up with that framework. Tom Villa and Jeff Taylor and Andy Cates came up with that framework to prioritize the use of donated human biological materials in cure research at the end of life. So we've recruited now 59 people in the last gift in the last 8 years, and it's all been observational. But the community is now asking what's next, and they're really wanting to test interventions at the end of life. So we've done some ethics and acceptability work around which interventions would be most suitable in this model, and sort of weighing in. It has not happened yet, but we had a really great meeting with the FDA in November 2023, where like people would consider maybe introducing like a cell and gene therapy to see if it reacts in tissues, because there's a lot of questions around the tissue, but we can't answer those questions without like doing a biopsy. So the community is really wanting to move towards more interventional studies at the end of their life. And that's really coming from the community advocating for this. So together, we are doing a lot of the socio-behavioral acceptability and ethics work to make sure that whenever we are ready to take that step, everyone is on board moving forward. But we think it's going to take more regulatory engagement, and the community is really ready. And so lots of ethics work. Obviously, I've mentioned treatment interruptions and the need for trauma-informed designs, high risk of these studies. So we always need to keep an ethics lens together with the social-behavioral lens. And we think that a collaborative ethics model will be the way to go, where we can innovate collaboration between ethicists and life scientists. This helps with innovation. If we pair social science and ethics with basic science, we can push the science a little bit further, but it also helps with significance because we know that the community is behind these types of projects. But we know that some of the emerging issues that we're facing now are treatment interruptions at ART initiation, which can be a little quite contradictory, but it's happening. Placebo-controlled design is another huge issue. The multi-ATI trials are being considered now, more than one ATI. Anything to do with resource-limited settings will need a lot more formative research. Cell and gene therapy trials, I've mentioned combinations, third-party risks, and then interventional trial at the end of life. So this is where we kind of hope to move the research in the next few years. Okay, so I've talked a lot about HIV. Now it's time to move to HBV. So everything we've learned in HIV cure-related research, we're sort of starting to apply to HBV cure-related research, because it's like we've been leading parallel lives with these integrated viruses. And this is why I got to meet Debika maybe 2-3 years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago at one of the ACTG annual meeting. Or she came to talk to one of our meeting, and I got really excited because that's also like an integrated virus and how we could collaborate moving forward. So hepatitis B is similar in terms of it being an integrated virus. There are 300 million people worldwide that live with HBV, 1 million annual deaths, and then 10% of people with HIV also have chronic hepatitis B worldwide. And similar challenges around limitation of current treatment. The current treatment suppress HBV but do not eliminate the replication competent cccDNA, the integrated HBV DNA, and the hepatitis B surface antigen, which is a key marker for HBV. So we know we need a cure due to the lifelong burdens of therapy, persistent stigma, and there are now over 40 compound candidates in development in HBV cure research alone. But it's also a very complicated field. Like this is cures and their definition. So the difference between complete cure, idealistic functional cure, realistic functional cures, attainable partial functional cures. We know that's really complicated in the different biomarkers. This is how I like to think about hepatitis B. That's my cure tree. It simplifies it for everyone. These videos by Thomas Stew, who does amazing work. So like hepatitis B virus, that's like removing the underlying infection. It's like the seed. cccDNA is like the root. And here we would suppress the virus protein production. And then hepatitis B surface antigen would be to activate the immune response. That's the key marker. I think if you remove hepatitis B surface antigen, you achieve functional cure. Debika is really the expert. I'm the social scientist. So if you have a hepatitis B question, please ask Debika. That's my understanding of hepatitis B. But there's lots of really great opportunities for collaborations. So the main strategies are really antiviral to suppress HBV replication, with the cap assembly modulators or the siRNAs or the cccDNA. These are only in the preclinical stage right now. And then those that target the hepatitis B surface antigen, so all the nucleic acid polymers. And then there's anything that really focuses on the immune system, like innate immunity, adaptive immunity, and so on. So we're starting to now think about a multidisciplinary agenda for HBV cure research. And of course, the Hep B Foundation keeps an amazing list of all the different compounds and drugs under development. They do an amazing job. So with Debika, we've adapted the framework that you saw earlier to hepatitis B cure-related research, looking at some of the key questions for the social behavioral aspects of HBV cure research, the ethics, particularly when we talk about treatment discontinuations, not only for people with HBV, but also people with HIV and HBV. There's going to be a lot more ethical considerations there. The critical aspects of community patient stakeholder engagement that we hope to do with the Hepatitis B Foundation, and the translation and implementation into the real world. So lots of issues around this framework that we have to consider. And Debika and Nika Bhattacharya, UCLA, actually did a review about 2 years ago of the social behavioral research in hepatitis B cure research and found limited research exists. So in fact, there were only two papers published, one in Germany, it was a discrete choice experiment, and then one in the US with 19 people with chronic hepatitis B. So we know that's an unmet need right now. We'll need a lot more research, and there's several unanswered questions around acceptability of these different interventions, acceptability of treatment discontinuations, cost effectiveness, and so on. This was one report in the great literature by the Hep B Foundation looking at acceptability of future HBV treatment outcomes. Loss of hepatitis B surface antigen was the most popular with 28%. This was the definition of functional cure, followed by stopping medication after 6 to 12 months, the decreased risk of liver cancer, improved quality of life, the loss of this HBV cccDNA, and then sustainable undetectable HBV DNA. So now we're looking at these outcomes for both people with HIV and people with HIV. We hope to do more research in this area. And then the ethics, of course, we can't forget the ethics. That's done in collaboration with Dr. Jeremy Sugarman at Hopkins, who's also applied similar frameworks from HIV to HBV cure research, sort of comparing the two. And the key issues are very similar across in terms of stigma, risk of interventions, outcomes monitoring, how we select people to participate, consent, and so on. So one project that's been confirmed now with Debika and I, she mentioned we're already collaborating, is on the implementation of HIV long-acting treatment to optimize HIV and HBV care. So now we're going to remove our cure hat. We're going to put an HIV treatment hat on. There are many issues at the intersection of HIV and HBV. This slide shows the global disease burden. So 40 million people live with HIV, 300 million with HBV. And then 10% of people with HIV also have HBV. But the HIV-HBV co-occurrence accelerates liver disease and increases mortality risk. But there's a really important paradox here in that people with both infections also achieve HBV functional cure faster. So lots of paradox when we get to the co-infections. But we know this presents unique challenges, particularly when we, in light of the newer HIV long-acting treatment that do not cover hepatitis B. So for people who switch from oral daily ART to HIV long-acting, their HBV can reactivate. Has anyone work in the clinic and seen this happen here in LA? Have you noticed this as an issue here? because we're seeing it. Yeah, Bebica has. We're seeing it in San Diego also. And there's been a few documented cases of acute HBV that occurred during these switches. So we know there are many knowledge gaps, not only among patients, but also among providers. And we know we need to do a lot more research, including implementation science. So that's what we hope to do. And pretty much every emerging therapies now that are HIV long-acting do not cover hepatitis B. So we have several unanswered questions around not only the management of HBV, but also vaccination against HBV. And some of these reactivations have actually been quite serious and harmful. So this is a project that we have that's hopefully will get IRB approved soon, but we hope to understand multi-level barriers and facilitators to HBV screening and management during HIV long-acting. And then we also hope to identify strategies to increase hepatitis B vaccination among people with HIV across the US. This is done in collaboration with the Hepatitis B Foundation. So hopefully, this is an implementation science project, and hopefully we'll get started soon. But of course, there are many cross-cutting issues with HIV and HBV. So with stigma, treatment discontinuations, the role of co-infections, health systems gap, and then of course, community trust and engagement, which are critical for meaningful participation and sustained impact. So in summary, the landscape of translational HIV and HBV research is changing to include more social behavioral research. There's now an expectations for patient and human-centered design and more holistic approaches. There's a great interest in leveraging HIV prevention treatment cure research continuum, but also in more collaborations between HIV and HBV. And then we think that social behavioral research can lead to more patient-centered outcomes when it also is included alongside the basic clinical and translational research. So this is the team working on HIV, HBV. It's an amazing team. This is the last gift, San Diego. This is people at UCSF that we collaborate with, and then the team in South Africa. Lots of people to be thankful for. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Karine. I'm coming up to look at the questions too here with you. So we have a couple of minutes, I think. Oh, great. Thank you. So I think we have a couple of minutes here without anything else in the room. So do we have any questions here? Yes, Dr. Zach. Oh, hang on. Let me give you that. They can hear you.
Thanks. I'm very intrigued with the end of life program. I've seen it presented numerous times. What's the average span of getting tissues after life ends?
Great. Good question. So the window that we have is 6 hours. So after people pass away and they're declared to have passed, we have 6 hours to do the rapid research autopsy. So that's
great. Thank you.
It's as fresh as possible. And people provide informed consent for that. So they understand the scientific rationale for fresh tissues.
While we're waiting for other questions, Karine, I had a question. So thank you, by the way, for a wonderful talk. As you think about HIV and hepatitis B co-infection or hepatitis B cure research, which area do you think needs the most attention? So, if we think about Hep B stigma for patients, if we think about provider knowledge of hepatitis B cure research, if we think about therapeutic misconceptions, what areas do you think, if you had to focus on one priority, where would you go?
One is hard. One is really hard. I think the one that I think we have to be most proactive about is around treatment discontinuations, because it will affect both the long-acting and also the multidisciplinary cure research, really thinking ahead around how to do treatment interruption safely and ethically and not inadvertently and all of that. So I think for me, that because it's at the intersection of so many social, behavioral, and ethical issues. But if I had to pick 4, I would say, for me, right now, the ones that I'm struggling with the most and trying to really focus on are informed consent and decision-making, making sure people really know what they're getting themselves into in terms of the risks and the benefits and the lack of benefits and the uncertainty, which is different from risk, the partner participant protections, That will also apply for hepatitis B cure research for the sex and drug use partners if they do interrupt treatment. So there could be a lot of really great synergies between the fields there. Mental health, psychosocial support, particularly right now, and then reducing the trial burden, because we know people want easy trial participation. And some of the trials have become so demanding and burdensome. We need to really simplify some of these interventions. I think that these are my 4, but yes.
Thank you. One more question here.
So that was a terrific talk, and it's great to see the field of collaboration between socio-behavioral research and HIV evolve to looking at these cure studies, and now this interaction with HBV. Sorry. So my other thought in this was Hep C.
Yes.
Right. So are you doing some work with Hep C? I mean, I see so much overlap in their area too, and I think you've worked on Hep C also. So wondering if you guys are doing some work in that area.
I'll let Dubé answer this one.
Oh, well, I think there's been a lot of great social and behavioral science research in hepatitis C. I think the biggest difference in hepatitis C is that we have a cure now with the direct acting antivirals. Unlike HIV and Hep B, Hep C does not integrate into the DNA, and so there is a cure. But I think questions around reinfection risk for hepatitis C, because you don't have antibody, although you have antibody positivity, that doesn't equate to protection. And so understanding reinfection risks, understanding whether and how much quality of life has improved after a hepatitis C cure would be important. And then also other issues around hepatitis C, like cardiovascular disease and other morbidity, hepatocellular carcinoma, that we knew those individuals were at an increased risk for. Now knowing that is, mitigated, what are their perceptions of that? I think those are some questions that could be explored.
Yeah, lots of it. And also implementation science and access, post-cure, like the cost effectiveness. There could be a lot of really interesting models there. Lots of opportunities for cross collaboration, for sure. Thank you.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much,
all.
Dr. Dubé.